Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome to Jump. As a reminder, every Wednesday at 10 o'clock CT, a group of us get together, a team from N2 Growth, and we talk about things that are jump related. And jump related are those things that we believe that everyone has a chance to fulfill their full potential. And the reason that often people fall short is they're just not willing to take a leap and take a jump. So welcome to today's episode of Jump, where we're going to talk about personal branding, building a personal brand, shaping a personal brand, sustaining a personal brand. And it always surprises many of us, including me, that people will spend more time thinking about what they're going to have for lunch than about building the most important thing that they have in not only their professional life, but in their personal life is their brand. And that requires real thought, real vision, and we're going to get into that today. And we're also going to share some tips that we've used and also things that we've seen other people do really, really well that we can borrow from. So I'm going to start with you, Vera. And when you think about a brand, and as it relates to your personal brand, how do you think about that, including what is a brand?
Thank you, Brian. Brands, they live in the minds of people, essentially. And what is interesting, because the other day I was actually checking statistics on the value of intangible assets in organizations. And it's extremely interesting because companies like Apple, like Google, almost 80% of their total value are intangible assets, which are essentially trademarks, brand value, and human capital. So in this respect, as you said, brands, they are extremely important, and it's also a way to differentiate a product from the competition. It's a way to make yourself visible. It's a way also to drive commercial value, and essentially, this same logic, it applies to personal brands. Now, I think that many people, many of us, and including myself at some point of time, they feel a little bit uncomfortable when it comes to talking about personal brands, because essentially it has two aspects. One aspect is, I call it an internal aspect. It's your value creation, right? It's your self-improvement and how you would like to do the best of what you do on a daily basis, how you want to improve, how you want to excel in your job. And then there's another side of a personal brand, which is essentially, I found a word for it, it's called self-packaging. So this self-packaging, essentially, it's very important, and it's a fundamental element in creating your personal brand value. But I think this is the element which makes many people feel uncomfortable. Sorry.
I was going to say that you said that to me before when we've had discussions about personal branding, and you're right. Perhaps even the vast majority of people around the world are uncomfortable sometimes thinking about themselves as a brand. And my response is often when people say that to me, because it's a very reasonable comment, especially people who have a lot of humility, and we all should, is if you don't spend time creating your personal brand in a very intentional way, I assure you that someone else is going to do that for you.
Absolutely.
A peer, a boss, a competitor, they are going to do that for you unless you find a way to cut through that. You said something else real powerful, which is use the word different. Unless you figure out in a very specific way, we're going to talk about that here as a team, how to identify your true north and point out your points of difference and how you're different in the world. Someone else is going to do that for you. But I kept going.
Right. Exactly. This is something that I think I've learned also in life, and it's exactly an example of if you don't do it, someone else will do it for you. Because when I was working in the investment and private equity industry, I was relatively young when I started. I was 25 maybe years old, and a very interesting project, a nice team to manage. very demanding investors, and like obviously it puts a lot of pressure on you. So from the very beginning, like first year, I focused truly on the internal perspective, on the operations, on team building, on trying to enter in every single detail and really excel from the operational point of view. But then there was, again, the person who was facing the decision makers and the investors. I think that I had the difficulty of really defending the project and essentially defending your job until someone else did it. I was very frustrated with how comes that, it's we worked for it. It's really the team achievement of what has been done. And then there was another person from an external group who was supervising the operational dynamics of the project. And I think this person who understood that, okay, so these guys, they're just hardworking, so let them do the work. And I'll be just positioning myself as the project leader who is taking the the benefits and the merits. So this very example, it actually taught me to look at it from the different perspective and really find the balance between doing hard work and like really focusing on improvement, because this is essential for the brand too. You cannot just be based on packaging. And I think that those brands which have nice packaging but no essence, they're not really, they're very fragile first, and they're not really how to say, sustainable in time. But you have to find a balance between the two, and at some point really get out of your comfort zone and look at it also scientifically, because maybe it's not coming naturally because you're an introvert, and it's not really in your blood, to be a great people person, to communicate and to be very, very, very active across all the social networks. But unfortunately, to succeed, one has to learn it. And it's a learning experience, because you asked the question, Brian, like, how did you build a personal brand? Like, I think personal brand building, it's a lifelong experience. It's every single day, step by step, you are contributing to your brand value, which at some point becomes also an organizational value.
You always say little things that are really smart as usual, and I'd love to build some of those out. For example, use the word introvert. Oftentimes we all have different personality types, extroverts, introverts, and oftentimes my introverted friends may say, well, I'm not that different, and everyone else has elements of things that I might have. I'll just work hard and that will persevere. Well, there's a lot of truth in that. The fact of the matter is we all are very unique and special in our own different ways. And just like a CEO of a company or a team has to figure out his or her vision, their North Star, introverted, not introverted, humble, not humble, you better figure out your North Star. You have to figure out how you're unique and special. We're going to talk about strengths finders here in just a second. But Kevin, you're relatively young in your career. You're about 10 years, a little over 10 years out of college. You've built a nice brand in the human capital field, and you continue to build it. In fact, you did something I thought was really, really outstanding on LinkedIn this morning about finding work in the middle of a pandemic. So how do you think about shaping your brand and continue to shape your brand? And what does that even mean to you at this point in your life and career?
Yeah, so I'll break it into two parts. I'll break it into the brand piece and then into the, if you don't do it, somebody will do it for you, because I have some strong opinions on that. So on the brand piece, Jeff Bezos actually said, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? And I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. And so it's good to know how people view you, but then you have to figure out what to do with it, right? And so I kind of think about it as like, if there can be a mirror of you, a mirror image of you as a brand, or there could be a distorted mirror image of you, right? So the mirror image is what is actually the case, and the distorted mirror image is how somebody views you because maybe they had a bad day, or because you said something to them that sounds like something said to them earlier in the day that really, set them off, right? Because you're dealing with people, and people can have reactions to things that are not entirely fact-based. So what I've always thought about in building a brand is Okay, I just had an interaction with a group of people. What do I think they thought of me, right? So trying to be like very self-reflective at every point in my career. And one thing that I think about is, okay, if this person thinks something of me, is this accurate? And if it's accurate, do I need to make a change? If it's not accurate, do I need to make a change to how this was perceived? And they're two very different things. And you shouldn't, kill yourself about fixing things that don't need to be fixed if it's just a matter of perception, and vice versa. The second thing is people will absolutely brand for you if you don't do it for yourself. And the reason is, in my opinion, because smart people are expected to have opinions. And so when you interact with somebody, let's say you go and you pitch in a boardroom and there's 6 people. Coming out of that, the CEO or whoever's leading the charge will say, what'd you think of Kevin? What'd you think of Kevin? What'd you think of Kevin? Right? And if you did not control the brand the way you wanted it to, that means they're going to give feedback that is just based on how they perceived the information you shared with them and what your overall interaction was. And so if you don't control the message, when if somebody's asked to share their opinion, they're going to give it, even if you don't want them to. And so that's how your brand can be perpetuated, even if it's not the brand you want to be perpetuated.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Let's talk about values for a second, because all great brands have, if you're a classic marketeer, you call brand attributes and so on and so forth, but you have to start with your North Star. And I'll give you an example. Early in my career, just like all of us are, and I'm 54 years old today, and we're still building and shaping our brands. There's a comment here that just came in. Building a brand is a lifelong pursuit, but you have to figure out your strengths early and often. And early in my career, I was trying to figure out how do I, my first promotion was a marketing manager, how do I stand out in marketing? And it wasn't about communication skills. Someone said to me, his name is Kurt Strand, he said, Brian, I think you could be a director someday because you can attract talent. I don't even know what that meant, but I chewed on it for a long time. And then I figured out what he really meant was I love figuring out what makes high achievers tick. And then I started thinking more about it. And you know what? If I can build my entire career, I didn't say it quite this way when I was 26, I can build my entire career about just being the talent guy, period. And if people say a lot of things about me in life, but if they say all Kibby cares about, sometimes they say it in a disparaging way. I don't care. All this guy cares about is talent, hiring the best people. Thank you. So my entire career, I've done a lot of different things, but my value was always talent first, always. And as I started to lead teams and grow teams, I'll spend 95% of my day just on the issue of recruiting talent, building culture, feeding it. That's it. And everything else goes to the wayside. So Ken, when you think about all the things you've done, an operations officer in the military, you worked for the mayor of Boston, you got your Harvard MBA, and now you're with N2 Growth. When you think about, and you're still relatively young in your career as well, when you think about shaping and building your brand, and you've been with N2 for 6 or 7 months, how do you think about that?
Yeah, Brian. I think that one thing that resonated with me when you were talking just a minute ago too is for the folks who are early in their career, like how do you separate yourself from your peers or your colleagues at that kind of same level in that early stage of your career? Because it often will feel like everybody you're surrounded with, because you went to college with them, you all are starting your careers out, you all have similar types of jobs, you all seem the same to a degree, at least on paper. So how do you separate yourselves from that standpoint and build up your brand? I think one piece of recommendation that I would give, especially folks earlier in their career, is finding a real mentor. I think that can be hugely helpful, because ultimately, I think Kevin and Vera alluded to it as well too, building your personal brand often comes with what is your reputation? What do other people think of you? And it doesn't just have to be being liked. We had another viewer comment as well too, that building a brand is not just being liked, but you also do have to show up and perform at your job and be good at it. And people have to want to work with you. So I think like all of those things can be compounded and be very helpful, especially early in the career as you get a mentor. And then I also think showing, and as you grow in your career, showing transparency, showing humility, and those types of things as a leader can be very valuable. Our colleague here at N2 Growth, Jeffrey Cohn, just had an article published in the Harvard Business Review this week. And the title of the article is Why CEOs Model Vulnerability. And there was a part in the article that I thought was really good. And it was from an interview that Jeff did with the CEO, Brad Smith from Intuit. And he talked about doing a 360 assessment and then taping it to the front door of his office for the whole company to see. So like, if you actually want that out there, like, you have to like have an kind of like an atmosphere within your company that like that the CEO suite, the executive suite is kind of available to people to see that. But you also have to have that humility and have that transparency inherently to even do that, because you know someone's going to take a picture, start posting it, sharing it around the office and those things too. So like, that's somebody that people may be drawn to. That's part of his brand as he's building it up. He's building that trust within his employees. Like, I can do this, others can as well too. And it also sets the example for those other rising stars. That was kind of the crux of Jeff's article as well too, is like, how do you prepare these rising stars, future CEOs, and lead by example? I think was a large part of what Jeff was doing.
I saw Peter's article and I thought it was terrific, and I love that part. And what I love about it is not just transparency and teaching candor across the organization, but it also can be hard to see yourself at any point in your life, even if you're the CEO of Intuit or Apple or whatever. And so one of the tricks, I love to go to college universities and we talk about and teach a class, and we talk about this building a personal brand. So people ask me if there's a trick to it or some version of that. And so what I always ask people to do is just what I call the 3 words in building your brand. And back to this idea that it can be hard to see yourself. So I suggest to people that write down 3 words, not more, 3 words that describe yourself. Take a few seconds to do that. Boom. And then if you have a best friend, we all do, ask your best friend 3 words to describe you. And then your mother, your brother, your uncle, your boss, your peers, your customers who are really close to you and know you well. And then go back and look at those 3 words and how you describe yourself and how others do. And there's a lot of goodness there when you ask that with an open heart and mind and never disagree or ask any more questions or anything along those lines. Just get those 3 words and really start to think about that, similar to what the Intuit CEO really did on a broader scale,
right? Because
that helps you shape your brand. It helps you calibrate, because we're going to continue to calibrate our brands for the rest of our lives. I love what Peter did with that. Anything else on that, Ken?
No, I think going back to the point I alluded to early on too, for the folks earlier in their career, having that mentor can be hugely beneficial, because for a number of reasons, career development, advice, but also somebody that will, at times help pull you along, support you. But then in for future job hires, as you progress in your career, and you're giving out reference checks and doing those things. And just like you're talking about, Brian, a lot of people in interviews will, like, I've had the question asked before in interviews and stuff, like, who are your last 5 bosses and what would they say you did well? What did they say you did poorly? And then if you get far enough along the process and they actually go talk to those folks or they do those reference checks and they compare it and see what it's like as well too. So I just think that having that mentor, understanding that having those difficult conversations early on will support you as well too.
Hey, Brian, I have a question for you as kind of an extension of the topic. I was thinking about, situational personal branding and contextual branding. So, and everybody on here has, will have opinions, because like Vera, you maybe brand yourself a little differently depending on, what country you're in, right? Where there are cultural communication differences, or, how do you brand yourself on a hockey team, versus in the military versus in, search, right? But I think about, like, my question to the group is, how do you, adjust your personal brand situation outcome without sacrificing your core values, right? So another example is, if I'm speaking to a venture capital firm about a search, I go in, with maybe a t-shirt under a sport coat and talk about candidates and people rather than process, because they want to know that I'm dialed in. When I went into Amex and sold the project there, I went in a suit and tie and I talked about process, right? What do you guys think of that?
Well, for me, I've been fortunate enough to work all over the world. I ran a business based in Sydney, Australia in my formative years when I was 33 to 35. And we all have customers. It's a diverse world, whether you're actually in a different country, and every single customer base, every single person we work with at N2 Growth, it's different every time. So I just go back to you mentioned it, Kevin, I just stay with my core. And I also think about at the core of all human need, whether you're in Japan, whether you're in Australia, whether you're somewhere in the UK or anywhere in anywhere in the world, is the core is respect. So as long as you are naturally curious about that other person, regardless of where you are, that is a core. And then for my core values, it's talent, culture, and strategy in that order. And I frame my business discussions and to some degree, my personal discussions around that. It's easy. For example, on talent, if you're naturally curious about what makes people tick, regardless of where you are, what cultures they're in, if you're really curious about what makes that person great, you're going to probably be okay.
Right.
And then if you're respectful around culture and ask what's practiced within someone's culture and respect that and really be curious about that, you're probably going to be okay. And then from a strategic point of view, the same. How do they think about business? How do they think about their business model? Or how, from a personal perspective, how have they strategically built their lives? So if you look at the core of respect as the core of all human need, then for me at least, my core values are talent, culture, strategy in that order. That's my framework. And as long as I do it in those ways, for me at least, that's worked out pretty well for me. But others want to share?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Vera, I'd like to jump in real quick, just because I was thinking about this a lot, Kevin, in the last 12 months of kind of like my career, because a lot of my early career was in the military, so ultimately government. And then I did, take a step back from working and went to business school for 2 years. And coming out of business school, I did a 1-year fellowship as an advisor to the mayor of Boston. So again, back in government. So about like 9 months ago or so, or really 12 months ago, as I was preparing for that fellowship to end and understand what I was going to do for the next step in my career, it was okay, at my age and amount of years in the workforce, like how do I perceive myself? How do I think of myself, and what is my personal brand? And talking with people and other folks, like it was that time to make the jump into the private sector. Aside from, internships around grad school and those things, like my true work experience had always been in the public sector and predominantly in the military, and then like local governments, big like city government as well too. So I knew I wanted to do that, but just like Brian was saying, I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to go somewhere where, an organization had the same values that I had, and N2 Growth was that perfect fit, for me to make that jump, right, Brian, to make the jump from a career full of public sector into the private sector and find a bunch of people who share my values. And I was just like, to be honest with you, attracted to, from a talent standpoint, the people in the organization were absolutely incredible. About 50% of our US team here at N2 Growth are all military veterans. And so a lot of us kind of grew up and understand that similar value base and shared similar experiences as well too. So like that's an element of how I thought about my personal brand and making that jump into the next step in my career as well too. So that's how I thought of it. And it was a very deliberate approach, but also it goes back to exactly what Brian was just talking about, the people and the shared values and the culture of the organization. And that was kind of my guiding light as I was trying to identify where I wanted to go in the private sector.
Right. And to your point, Kevin,
I love that you said that.
Right. Right parallel also with like the standard definition of brands, because obviously you have many international brands and in all the sectors. You look at food and beverage, car manufacturers, and many brands they actually have to adapt and even change their, like, not core values. They have to change their brand names if they go to another country. Like, there's the famous story of Mitsubishi Pajero that had to change its name and in the South America because it sounded like an insult. So I think that the same with personal brands, right? And that's why at the beginning I was dividing the two elements, the internal element and the packaging. So essentially you change the packaging, and it's a little bit like a role play, and it's very interesting because it correlates with the topic Brian and the team, another team you were discussing on Friday about the theater. So essentially, I think the best way to try yourself in different packagings is really to separate your character that has to communicate with the client, that has to give a speech within specific circumstances from your fears and from like all the elements which can have negative impact because you're just not used to expressing yourself in such a way. But your core values, they stay with you because they wouldn't go anywhere, whether it's integrity, whether it's strategic focus. It's just that you change the speech, you change the packaging. And I've seen it many times because when you move between countries, and in my experience, I was moving between conservative ex-Soviet countries and very open South American countries within Europe, where the business culture of France is completely different from the business culture in Spain. So each time you need to study how the external environment is organized, because certain I would say templates and certain words and certain ways of behavior, they can be completely unacceptable in a different cultural context. So it's a role play at the end, and I believe it's a very difficult job, but it's the only way to enhance your brand. Again, like it's not that you sacrifice its value, but you're really enhancing it because that's how you make your brand international.
Let's couldn't agree with you more, Vera. Let's go back to this idea of authenticity and building a brand. And oftentimes, when people fail to build a brand, it's because they're trying to be something that they're not. And all of us have experienced that throughout our lives. And sometimes we feel sometimes in any given day, we're doing something that we know is not authentic to us. And in fact, authentic means we're not great at it. And whenever we try to be something we're not, it doesn't work. For example, we've all been a part, I've been a part of building brands, companies, product brands, and anytime we try to build a product or a brand that is trying to be all things to all people, it always fails. But when we build a product that has a true north, and we're going after the authentic, whatever attributes of that brand, markets outside of it seem to find that. And I'll give you an example. I knew growing up, I always wanted to be a head of sales for this company called Prentice Hall. It was the big company, the big education company. Now it's called Pearson. And I knew coming up that talent was my thing. But I also knew that spending time with Excel spreadsheets, which I've never done, I've worked with people who have. But I knew that if you want to be a sales officer, sales management 101, when you take it in college, is data, spreadsheets, so on and so forth. But I've never invested time on it because I wasn't good at it. I knew to build my authentic brand, I knew that if I just hired the best sales leaders and sales managers and sales reps, and I poured everything into that and forget about everything else, the teams would win. But I would just hire other people who had those skills that I didn't have. So I got that. And when you think about, how do you think about encouraging and teaching other people to find their strengths, focus on that, and augment their weaknesses with other talented people? How do you think about that? Kevin, how do you think about that now?
Yeah. So I naturally start to think about it in the context of, executive teams, right? Because I'm thinking about it from, a recruiter's perspective. But, if you're thinking about building out an executive team from like the top down, so CEO, and then all direct reports, right? It's not just about the complementary skill sets across from function to function to ensure that it's a full team, but it's also the complementary skill sets like within those functions. So like, for example, let's say there's a sales, your head of sales spends a lot of time in the field and is great at building relationships, but not good at putting marketing, good at putting collateral together and presentations, etc. How do you ensure that they have a marketing counterpart that's excellent in those areas, right? Or if you think about a relationship between a product manager and a head of engineering, and that some heads of engineering are great visionaries and can picture what a product roadmap should look like. Others have absolutely no idea how to do that, but are amazing at hiring engineers, building teams, and getting product shipped, right? So how do you ensure that you look within the functions at a deeper level to find the right complementary skill sets? Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. So how about this? Let's switch something. Who have you seen? Who do you admire? It could be a business person, it could be anyone. Who do you admire has done a tremendous job of building their personal brand, and what can we learn from that? How about you, Ken? We'll start with you.
Sure. So someone that comes to mind here, I'm based in the Bay Area here in San Francisco, but someone that comes to mind is the NBA basketball star, Steph Curry. This is an individual who outside of basketball has done a lot of work in the local community and to be honest, in the national community. He's done partnerships, I believe, called My Brother's Keeper with former President Obama. I also just saw today, actually, in a newsletter that I subscribe to, that I know I've shared with Kevin previously and stuff, about all of the venture and private equity deals that come out on a daily basis. And Steph Curry, as an individual, was investing in a startup supporting folks with college student financial aid and stuff like that. So like he isn't just about, I'm sure he does, and I believe he has an endorsement deal with Under Armour, but he has many things outside of his basketball world that he focuses on, and that is clearly very important to him based on his actions and what he has done in that respect. So someone, to answer your question in that context, Brian, is Steph Curry, who lives, from what I can tell, his values through his actions outside of his day job.
I think it's tremendous. How about you, Vera?
Right. It's an interesting question, as I was reflecting on it before, but essentially there are a few names that come to my mind because I don't have a specific role model, but when I think about people with a strong brands, for me, those are, we talk about celebrities now, those are people that have worked very hard, again, on these quality technical components, and then that approach the question of personal branding in a very easygoing, in a very humble way. Like, for example, if we speak about sports, the one who comes to my mind is the tennis player Rafael Nadal, the Spanish one, that when he gives interviews, he is extremely humble. He's extremely easygoing, and you cannot even imagine the work that's behind and all this achievement, and obviously his talent. Then, as I think, again, most of the role models and the best examples in terms of personal branding, they come from the US. So I think that two people that come to my mind are Oprah Winfrey, of course, and I'm sure Lady Gaga. So both also coming from a very difficult background with difficult personal stories, and now they are there. They're absolutely authentic. They are 100% focused on what they do, and with this example, with this energy, they really drive themselves and show people how to be great without only concentrating on the packaging side, because today with social media, today with all the tools and communication tricks you can have, it's easy to build a brand from the superficial perspective. But I think that it's really hard to destroy what Paul just mentioned in his comment, that it takes years to build and it takes 10 minutes to destroy. So I think that where there is an essence, there's a higher probability of keeping it and bringing the brand throughout the lifetime without having a necessity to actually do rebranding.
Right. He's one of my favorites as well. Kevin, how about you?
My absolute favorite brand story is Robert Downey Jr. I am a huge fan of his as an actor, but it's an interesting case in point, and having a core value that carries you through multiple iterations of a brand, both good and bad. So I think the core value is he's always been a great actor, and he almost won an Oscar as Chaplin early on in his career. He was amazing on Boston Public, and then he ran into a very difficult personal time with drug abuse. We're talking 10, 15 years ago. He was arrested because he fell asleep in his neighbor's house, right? And now he is one of the most highly sought after actors, but also known as he is a beloved character in the homes of families throughout the world, right? After making all those mistakes, he became Iron Man. And these are PG-13 movies that everybody loves. His most recent movie is Dr. Dolittle. I just think it's an unbelievable example of a brand transformation.
I'm glad you brought that up, Kevin, because oftentimes people think, well, my brand gets set. And people will say your brand gets set early. But there are so many examples of you can resurrect. Anyone can resurrect their brands. There may be a few things that you can never get away with, and those are. But provided that you don't do anything really crazy, you can recover your brand as Downey did with a lot of work. And along these lines, there's a guy I worked with many years ago. His name is Patrice Jones. His brother's Bomani Jones. His sister is a Pulitzer Prize author. He's a really smart guy. About 20 years ago, he said, always remember this, Kibby. Not everyone needs to like everybody. That's true in building your personal brand and in building your products and services. You're not going to appeal to everyone. If you do, you're going to dilute yourself. So one of my favorite guys is a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. He's all over LinkedIn, and people said to me, Brian, you say the same things you like. You would love this guy. And I started watching a little bit. He's a little too much with the colorful language, if you know what I'm saying. But then once you get past that shtick, his stuff is really, really good. And the reason I bring up the lesson I learned from Patrice Jones is he's not trying to be everything to everybody. But because he's not, he pulls this crazy broad audience because he has a very specific way he goes about things, but then he pulls in people like me and potentially people like you. His name is Gary Vee. If you haven't checked him out, you should. He started this like wine study thing because his parents had a wine store, and then he's grown it into this major media brand. So I love Gary Vee amongst many others. Anything along those people that inspired you, or things that you've learned from them that you can build into your life before we get into some tips and some other thoughts?
We have a viewer comment here, Brian, on someone mentioning Elon Musk, who famously last week just sent out a tweet mentioning that he thought his company Tesla's stock was way overvalued. So I mean that's probably one for another day, and I mean a very talented and successful individual, but I don't
think it's one for another day. Let's dive into that. In fact, it's every era in the United States and around the world has always been political. People say this is so different today, and it's so divisive, and it's probably true in a lot of ways. So a friend of mine called, and she's a money manager, and she said, Elon Musk, and she's got shares like we were doing Elon Musk in Tesla. He's lost it. Now he's tweeting in the middle of a pandemic, God save America and all this crazy stuff. He's losing it. And I said, no, he's not. That's completely on mad genius brand for Elon Musk. It's completely on. You take an electric vehicle. Anyone can build a car. And now it's the most valuable car company in the world. That's completely on Elon Musk genius. And I would say that's completely on Rawe, which is, my stock's too high. I don't know. It makes us curious, right? It's like Colin Powell said, you know how you're a great leader or marketer. He didn't say that part, Madigan. You are great when you can make people curious. And Elon Musk does that in a genius way. What are your thoughts? I mean, you guys have elite educations and MBAs. I don't, but I think it's fascinating. What do you think? How about you, Ken? You just somewhat recently out of the Harvard Business School. What do you think about Elon Musk and the things that he's doing now that he's so successful? Treat the safety? Keep on going with what brought you?
Yeah, no, I mean, if kind of don't fix what isn't broke to a degree, right? Like he's been wildly successful, and I think he's brought to the forefront kind of the electric car and what that can do for us, the car industry, and the planet as well too, and his other companies as well. So he thinking big, SpaceX and everything. So no, it's I'm glad one of our viewers mentioned his name, because he's a fun person to talk to, and there's probably plenty of business school cases that could be written about things that he's done in the past that were not some would argue the best decision at the moment, but when you look at it over time, right, Brian, kind of to your degree, there's an element there of that kind of mad genius, his brand right there.
And here's the thing: there's mad genius in all of us. Most of us fail because we're afraid. Ourselves. This is the whole idea of jump.
Right.
Most people do not achieve their full potential because they're just afraid. They're afraid people aren't going to like them. Or as my friend Patrice Jones said, not everyone's going to like you. People are just afraid of all of those things. So whatever it means to you, I would suggest to people, find what you think the outer edge of crazy is for you. For me, I'm not, Elon Musk is a genius in so many different ways. I can't do what he can do, but I can do outer edge crazy things that are within myself that I might consider crazy for me to do, that I could probably get away with and establish my brand. So whatever it is that for you, I would put your time on your phone, whoever's on and watching this, and I do this a lot, spend 30 minutes, write down the craziest things that you can do, that you can pull off, that are within your capabilities, but would be crazy for you and you're afraid of. Learn from people like Elon Musk and others that do crazy, I'm going to use Gary Vee's, like, do crazy shit. Don't do crazy woo-hoo, go to prison, kill your brand stuff, but do crazy stuff. And I love that. Is there anyone else that comes to mind other than Elon Musk is doing some really crazy, interesting things right now? How about anyone at N2 Growth? Are the things that we're doing here? Anyone inspires you from N2 Growth who's doing some things that are just a little out there? In a good way. We're in a pretty conservative industry, right? People hire N2 Growth to place C-suite executives and board members and others, and that's very, very serious business, and it's expensive. I'll give you one, Mike Maya, our founder and chairman. Every single day for many, many months now, he has really cool videos he puts almost every day on LinkedIn. It seems a little wacky. You're probably not going to find whoever the CEO of Korn Ferry or Spencer Stewart or others, you're probably not going to find them doing that. But he always finds a way to bring it back to leadership and greatness. Mm-hmm. You're like, where's he going with this video? What is that? Some guy, whatever that is. But I think that's pretty cool. Now, that may be crazy-esque for elite search firms, but that's how you get noticed. How does a boutique search firm become a top 10 search firm? Well, when you don't have perhaps 100 years of history. I think you have to do things that are interesting, that aren't crazy, but capture the imagination. You guys know who Howard Stern is?
No, of course. Yeah.
So Howard Stern, I think many of us have seen the movie 20 years ago about how he built himself, and he was brilliant at it. He was going after a certain target market. He didn't worry about everyone liking him, and because of that, the people that loved Howard Stern would listen to him for an hour a day, and the people who didn't like him would listen to him for 3 hours. I'm not suggesting that we do things like that, but there's a lot of goodness there when you think about building out your personal brand. Can I offer something?
Well, real quick, Brian, on this subject, and not to compare our colleague to Howard Stern, but president of our leadership development team, Jim Hotalin, who has many decades in the Air Force, leading tens of thousands of people, is now launching or has launched his podcast, and so that podcast that we have out there now is growing, and he goes and interviews other leaders from a wide variety of industries and sectors of our economy, and he's done. I've introduced him to a couple folks that I know that he's had interviews with, and on one of them, I was like, hey, it's just going to be a little bit of a different take for you. A friend of mine who served in the Army and is now a Pro Bowl NFL player for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who has leadership combat experience and is also, an all-star in the NFL. And I connected Jim with him and they had a conversation. I was just like, before that conversation, I was like, Jimmy, it's just going to be different than some of the executives who you've spoken to. And he's like, that's great. That's what I want. That like true, raw, unfiltered, just natural type of conversation as well too. So Jim, to answer your earlier question, somebody here at MP Growth who's doing something different and exciting and putting out something for us as an organization, but really putting out there for the world to hear more and more from.
And his show is called Irons Sharpens Iron. And
yes. Oh, sorry. Did I not say that?
It's a great show. And what I love about that is unique. It is unique for a world-class search firm doing the things that we do, which you can't get higher stakes than what we do. And you have a former command sergeant major, I think it was command sergeant major of the National Guard of the Air Force. And he's our head of learning and development and has a podcast called Iron Sharpens Iron.
Yep. That's
different. It's out there, but the content's great, but it's different.
And it shows him continuing to learn as well too. Not just him, but he's learning, continuous learning as an individual, but he's learning on behalf of all of us who then can gain value from those conversations as well too.
And Brian, I would have to give you some credit too, as somebody thinking about and doing crazy shit, because you run N2 Ventures, and that's about figuring out innovative new ways to do business better in a market where not many companies are expanding or have the mental kind of capacity to think about creative new ways to do business. So I would personally give you a kind of friendly pat on the shoulder for doing some crazy shit.
Well, I appreciate that. And as you know, Ventures is a business accelerator. So we have a lot of work to do along those lines. So thanks for that, Kevin. Before we close, if I can take some creative license to offer a couple of tips that I offer to people that I coach, because I spend probably a third of my week coaching senior executives and others around the country and in some degree around the world. And it's something that I wish I had done. But when I started coaching people a third of my time, I asked everyone to do this when they're building out their personal brand. And I wish I'd done it earlier. And we have all worked with CRM systems, Salesforce and others when we're building our customer a contact management system, right? So what I ask everyone to do that I work with on a full-time basis and coach them is what I call Project 360. And what I ask them to do, you can either do it on a Google Doc, you can do it on an Excel spreadsheet, you can do it in the Salesforce. I don't really care, whatever you decide to use. But everyone who can touch your brand, who can have an opinion on you, and one of the guys I work with is in the nearly 1,000 names now. You put in your system, just like you're navigating Salesforce.com, your board, your key customers, your peers, people 7 or 8 levels down in the organization. It could be a new star, 24 years old out of Harvard that you think may be going places. You build out this 360-degree view of your entire universe of people who can touch your brand. And all customers are important, but they're not created equal. And you do that from top to bottom. And then on a Sunday, once in a while, if you met a board member somewhere or you met a star somewhere and you hadn't had a contact with them in 3 or 4 months, find a way to reach out. I call it Project 360. It doesn't mean that you're going to get everyone to love your brand, but you darn well better have this universe and be very intentional about how you go about touching the people who can form, or more importantly, form other people's opinions about you. I did it haphazardly, and it worked out to a degree for me in my career, of course, but being far more intentional about it and really investing in it, and the people I work with, it pays off handsomely. And the second thing about building your brand is financial literacy. And I'm not talking to the graduates who are 24, 25 years old. I'm talking about the 45, 50, 54-year-old people who still aren't financially literate. And if you do not get a hold of your personal finances, if you're not financially literate, find people who can help you. Because if you're worried about your finances and living paycheck to paycheck, and especially in the light of all this that's going on in the world today, this is a time for financial reflection. Because when you're building out your personal brand and you're thinking about all this other stuff, you can't focus on the goodness that is you. So before we close, any other comments about that or anything else that are on your minds when it comes to personal brands?
Just one other tip is, I think, as you're thinking about honing your personal brand, just, be self-reflective and be very cognizant of how people react to you and respond to you, and like really pay attention to facial expressions and paralanguage and tone, because that will tell you how you're coming across.
Couldn't agree with you more. And those instincts.
Yes, I agree with Kevin in this respect, because again, coming back to the question, to the topic of the theater, it's a very difficult exercise to see yourself from the outside, but essentially it's the only way to objectively evaluate whether you are good or not good communicator, because you might have a lot of information, had lots of knowledge, but essentially brand building is about how you present it to the audience. So try to just get out of your skin without being a different person, but get out of your skin and look at yourself from all the angles and from all different perspectives.
Ken, any last words?
No, all set.
So again, every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, our team, what we call Jump. And again, everyone has so much enormous potential. And if we just raise our hand, take more shots, this is what Jump is all about. And that's it. So listen, have a great rest of your day, guys. And thank you for joining us on LinkedIn and other places around the world. Have a day, great, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.